My husband of 38 years had his second heart attack on a Wednesday. By the following Monday, my son-in-law had already called my bank. I didn't find out about the call until 3 weeks later, when a customer service representative mentioned it while I was disputing a charge. She said someone had called inquiring about the process for adding an authorized user to an account belonging to an elderly customer. She thought I already knew. I thanked her and hung up and sat in my car in the parking lot of the Wells Fargo for a long time without starting the engine. That was the beginning. Though I didn't understand the full shape of it yet, my name is Winifred. Most people call me Freddie, have since I was 7 years old, and decided I didn't like the name my parents gave me. I'm 67 years old. I spent 29 years as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, doing work that attorneys signed their names to and that I made sure was right. I know what documents look like. I know what they mean. I know what people are really asking when they phrase a question a certain way. That kind of work either sharpens you or hollows you out, and I had always been glad it did the former. My husband, Leonard, died in February. Cardiac arrest, massive, the kind the doctors describe with words like catastrophic and unsurvivable, and that you file away in a part of your mind where language stops working. He was 70 years old. He had just renewed his fishing license for the year. The renewal card was still on the kitchen counter when the paramedics came. We had been married since I was 29 and he was 32. We had one daughter, Janelle, who is 39 now and lives 40 minutes away in Concord with her husband Brent and their 2 children. We have a son, Marcus, not our Marcus, that's not right. We have a son, Walter, who is 43 and lives in Denver and who called every day for the first month and still calls every Sunday. Walter is steady in the way that steady people are. Quietly and without making a point of it. Janelle and Brent came the day Leonard died and stayed for the funeral and 2 weeks beyond. Brent carried things. He offered to drive me places. He said the right words at the right moments and smiled the right smile when there were people in the house. I had known Brent for 11 years, and I had never figured out how to trust him. That's a hard thing to admit about the man your daughter loves. But you spend 3 decades reading documents for a living, and you learn to notice the gap between what something says and what it means. The house was the first thing. It's a 4-bedroom colonial on a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood we moved into in 2001. Leonard and I had paid it off in 2019. It was ours clean, no mortgage, no lien, nothing. We had done that deliberately and with some sacrifice, the way people do when they grew up with parents who remembered the Depression and passed that particular anxiety down like a family heirloom. 2 months after Leonard died, Brent mentioned the stairs. Casually, the way you mention weather. We were having dinner, the 4 of us, and he said something about how the layout of the house must feel different now that I was on my own, and wasn't it a lot of square footage for one person, and those stairs. I said the stairs were fine. He nodded and moved on to something else. I noted it the way I used to note inconsistencies in contracts. You don't react, you file it. A month after that, Janelle suggested I come with them to tour a place she had read about, an independent living community in Kannapolis about 25 minutes away. She described it the way the brochure must have described it. Resort-style amenities, a vibrant social calendar, chef-prepared meals. She showed me photographs on her phone. The rooms were clean and beige and small. I said I'd think about it. That was a lie, but it was a useful one. What I was actually thinking about was a conversation I had with our estate attorney 8 years before Leonard died. His name is Howard, and he has been practicing elder law and estate planning in Charlotte for 31 years. Leonard found him through a colleague who had watched his own family implode after his mother died without a proper plan in place. We had sat in Howard's office on a Tuesday afternoon and spent 2 hours going through everything we had and everything we might have, and what happened to it if one of us died, or both of us, or if one of us became unable to manage our own affairs. That last part was Howard's gentle way of introducing a subject people don't like to think about. What happens if someone decides you can't manage your own life anymore? By the end of that Tuesday, Leonard and I had made decisions. Our home was transferred into a revocable living trust. Our joint brokerage accounts were retitled into the same trust. Leonard's pension survivorship benefits, which passed to me automatically, were a matter of federal structure, not local courts. My own 401k and the IRA I had rolled over from my years at the firm were individually titled and beneficiary designated, which meant they transferred outside of probate entirely. Howard had explained all of this in plain terms, which I appreciated. He also told us something I filed in a very particular part of my memory, the part where I keep things I expect to need eventually. He said that if anyone were to pursue a guardianship or conservatorship proceeding against either of us, the first thing the court would do is inventory our assets. And assets held in a properly structured trust were not only more protected, they were more complicated for a petitioner to challenge, more expensive to pursue, and, in his experience, significantly more likely to discourage people who were motivated by opportunity rather than genuine concern. I had not told Janelle about any of it. Leonard and I had discussed that too. We weren't hiding anything illegal. We weren't deceiving anyone. We were simply following advice Leonard used to summarize in his own way. Don't show your cards before the hand is played. By October, 8 months after Leonard died, the campaign had become organized. That's the only word for it. Organized. There was a logic to the sequence that I recognized from my paralegal years, when I used to watch opposing counsel build a case piece by piece, each motion reasonable on its own. The full picture only visible when you stepped back and looked at the whole. First came the expressions of concern, the stairs, the house being too large, the drive being too far. Then came the social framing. Wouldn't it be nice to be around people my own age? Didn't I feel isolated? Wasn't I worried about what would happen if I had a health event and no one was nearby? Then came the specific suggestion, revisited and represented with increasing specificity and accompanied, at that point, by printed materials. Janelle left a folder on my kitchen table one Sunday. It had a cover sheet with the name and logo of the independent living facility. Inside were pricing sheets, a floor plan of a one-bedroom unit, and a document I recognized immediately. It was a checklist used in the preliminary stages of assessing whether a voluntary conservatorship arrangement might be appropriate. I picked it up and read it and put it back exactly where she had left it. The following week, I called Howard. I hadn't spoken to him since the week after Leonard's funeral, when he had called simply to express condolences and tell me he was available whenever I was ready to review the existing documents and make any adjustments. I called him back on a Thursday morning, and we spent 90 minutes on the phone going through everything. Howard confirmed the trust was exactly as we had set it up. He walked me through what a guardianship or conservatorship filing would look like in North Carolina. The process, the timeline, the burden of proof required, and what a petitioner would encounter when they went looking for assets to place under court supervision. He used a phrase I appreciated, a significantly less attractive target. That was what Leonard and I had become, from a legal standpoint, without ever having planned it that way. We had simply been careful at the right time. I thanked Howard and wrote some notes on a legal pad I keep in the desk drawer in the kitchen. Then I made lunch and went to my water aerobics class at the Y, and did not think about it again until there was a reason to. The reason came in November. Janelle called on a Tuesday to ask if I was free that Sunday for dinner. I said I was. She said she wanted me to meet someone, a friend of Brent's who happened to have some expertise that might be useful. She kept the language loose and warm. The way you keep language when you want someone to agree before they understand what they're agreeing to. I said that sounded fine. When I pulled into their driveway that Sunday, I noticed a car I didn't recognize. A gray Audi, parked along the curb. I noticed it the way Leonard used to say, you should notice things that are out of place, not with alarm, just with attention. Brent answered the door. He looked like a man performing ease, which is different from a man who is at ease. He took my coat. He said, "Mom, we're so glad you're here. There's someone we've been wanting you to meet." The man in the living room was perhaps 55, with the practiced calm of someone who spends considerable time delivering news people don't want to receive. He stood when I came in. He had a briefcase, not a portfolio. A full briefcase, the kind that implies volume. His name was Mr. Kavanaugh. He was an attorney. He specialized, he said, in elder law and family estate coordination. He was Brent's attorney, as it turned out. Brent had retained him, Janelle explained. They were simply trying to make sure there was a plan, that I was protected, that nothing was left to chance. She reached across the couch and touched my hand when she said it. She said they loved me. She said they just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I looked at my daughter when she said that. She believed it. That was the thing that complicated everything. Brent had arranged this, but Janelle believed in it. The way you believe in something when someone you love has spent months making it feel like your own idea. Mr. Kavanaugh opened his briefcase. He had prepared, he explained in the measured tone of a man who does this routinely, several documents for my review. A financial power of attorney naming Brent as my agent. A healthcare proxy. And, he said, pausing in the way that lawyers pause before the sentence, the whole meeting has been building toward a petition framework for a voluntary guardianship arrangement, which would allow Brent to manage my financial affairs while I continue to live my life with, as he put it, full independence and dignity. Full independence and dignity. He said those 4 words and looked at me steadily. I looked at Janelle. She was watching me with an expression that wanted me to be grateful. I looked at Brent. He was looking at the coffee table. I turned back to Mr. Kavanaugh. I said, which assets, specifically, are you proposing would fall under the scope of this guardianship? He named them. The house. Any bank accounts in my name. Investment or brokerage accounts. Any property titled to me individually. I let him finish. There was a clock on the mantel. I could hear it. I picked up my coffee cup and set it back down on the saucer without making a sound. I said, our home has been held in a revocable living trust since 2016. The title transferred at that time. I am the trustee. The house is not an asset in my individual name. My brokerage accounts are held by the same trust. My IRA and 401k have designated beneficiaries and pass outside of probate. My pension survivor benefits are a federal instrument and are not subject to private guardianship proceedings in North Carolina. I paused. I don't believe there's anything here for your documents to cover. The room was quiet, and the way rooms get quiet when the thing everyone expected to happen doesn't happen. Mr. Kavanaugh looked at his briefcase. He looked at Brent. Brent looked at Janelle. Janelle looked at me. Her expression moved through several things. Confusion first, then something I can only describe as recalculation, then a version of embarrassment so acute it looked almost like pain. Because my daughter, I understood in that moment, had not fully known. She had known the general shape of what Brent had planned. She had not known that he had told her a story about what there was to take. I did not press that. Not then. I stood up. I thanked Mr. Jha. Kavanaugh for his time and meant it. He was a professional who had been hired to do a job, and this outcome was not his failure. I said the pot roast smelled wonderful. I said I thought I'd head home before it got too dark. I kissed Janelle. I nodded to Brent. I put on my own coat. I drove home on I-85 with the radio off and pulled into my garage and sat in the car for a few minutes before I went inside. Then I made a cup of tea, sat in Leonard's armchair by the window, the one with the view of the backyard where he used to watch the birds, and felt something I had not felt in 10 months. Not happiness, exactly. Steadiness. The feeling of standing on ground that holds. What came next took weeks, not days. That's the part people don't tell you in stories. The part after is never clean. Walter called Monday morning. I had texted him the night before, just that I'd had an interesting Sunday and would explain when we talked. He called before 8 a.m., his time, which meant he was worried. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, which is what he does when he's trying not to say something he'll regret. Then he said some things he probably didn't regret at all. I told him that Janelle was not the architect of this, and that I needed him to hold on to that. Janelle called Tuesday afternoon. She had clearly been crying. She asked me if we could talk, and I said yes, but I want to wait a few days. I said that not to punish her, but because I knew that a conversation that needed to happen should happen when both people are steady enough to mean what they say. She came to my house Thursday evening. We sat at the kitchen table with decaf coffee and the overhead light, and we talked for 2 hours. She told me things I had suspected, and some I hadn't. She told me that Brent had framed it, over the course of months, as protection, that she had become afraid of the things he described, me falling, me being confused, me making bad decisions without anyone to catch me. Fear is a remarkably effective tool when it's directed at someone who loves you. She asked me why I had never said anything. All those months of the suggestions and the brochures and the Sunday dinners. Why hadn't I confronted Brent directly? Why hadn't I told her I knew what was happening? I thought about Leonard. I thought about 30 years of watching people negotiate and maneuver and argue their way into corners. I said, if I had confronted Brent, it would have become a conflict between your husband and your mother. You would have had to choose a side. You would have chosen his, not because you didn't love me, but because that's what marriage asks, and because he would have spent the next year making sure the story you believed was the one he'd written. This way, you got to see it yourself. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked when I'd called Howard. I told her November of last year, 5 months ago. She put her hands over her face. I reached across the table and touched her arm. I said, your father set all of this up. I just made a phone call. She cried for a while, and I let her. Then I got up and found the box of tissues on the counter and put them on the table between us and poured us each a little more coffee. Because that is also what you do. There was one more conversation I needed to have, and I knew it. I drove to Janelle and Brent's house on a weekday morning, a Wednesday, when I knew Brent had his standing client meetings. Janelle met me at the door. I told her I needed a few minutes alone with him when he was home, and I would let her know when I was coming. I went the following Friday afternoon. Janelle took the children to the park. Brent answered the door and held it open, and we went to the kitchen and sat down at the table without either of us suggesting it. It's just where people sit when something real is going to be said. He didn't apologize right away. I hadn't expected him to. I told him what I told Janelle, that I understood fear was often underneath the things people do, and that I didn't know his history or his parents' history, or what had made him someone who needed to secure things before they could be lost. I said I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know what he had tried to do, that hiring an attorney to initiate a guardianship process against a person who is not impaired and doing it without that person's knowledge was a serious thing, that what we had was not going to look the same on the other side of it, and that what it looked like would depend almost entirely on what he did next. He sat across from me with his hands flat on the table. He said, eventually, that he hadn't thought of it the way I was describing it. I said I believed that, partially. I also believed that it was easier not to think of it the way I was describing it when there was something to be gained by the alternative version. He didn't argue with that. I told him I wanted to have a real relationship with my daughter and my grandchildren, and that I was willing to do the work of getting there. I told him that what I was not willing to do was pretend, that if we were going to build something, it had to be built on what was actually true. He nodded. He said he understood. I put on my coat and thanked him for the water he had put in front of me and went home. Spring arrived the way it does in the Piedmont, not gradually, but all at once. Dogwoods and redbuds exploding in a single warm week, the kind of week that makes you forget you were ever cold. I opened the windows for the first time since October and stood in the kitchen listening to the birds Leonard used to catalog by name. He kept a running list in a notebook by the window. The notebook is still there. I've started adding to it when I recognize something, which is not often, but I'm learning. Walter came from Denver in April. He stayed for 10 days, and we did ordinary things. We went to the farmer's market. We had people over for dinner. We watched old movies on the living room couch until one of us fell asleep. It was the most normal 10 days I'd had since February of the previous year, and I didn't realize how much I'd needed normal until I was standing in the middle of it. My granddaughter asked me on the last afternoon why Grandpa's chair still had his reading glasses on the side table. I told her it was because that was where he kept them, and some things stay where they belong even after a person is gone. She thought about that for a moment and then climbed up onto the chair and settled in with a book. I stood in the doorway and watched her and didn't say anything. Brent and Janelle came to dinner the following month. It was not easy and it was not performed. It was two people beginning the long, unscripted work of repairing something, which is harder than damaging it was and takes longer and has no guaranteed outcome. I'm not certain what the outcome will be. I am certain that I will not accept a version that requires me to pretend. Janelle called one night in May, late, after the children were in bed. She said she had been thinking about what I said, about how I knew and didn't say anything, and she wanted me to know she understood it better now. She said she was sorry it had taken her this long to see clearly. I told her that was all right, that seeing clearly is harder when someone you love has been carefully arranging what's in your line of sight. I found Leonard's fishing license renewal card in a kitchen drawer in June, still in its plastic sleeve. I held it for a while. Then I put it in the box I keep on the shelf in the closet, the one where I put the things that are too important to throw away and too painful to keep out. Some things you don't have to decide about yet. The house is quiet in a way that took some adjusting. I don't mean empty, I mean quiet. There's a difference. Empty is a kind of ache. Quiet can be something else, if you let it be. I have been learning to let it be. I have been learning to let it be something else. I go to water aerobics on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I joined a book club at the library on Millbrook Road, which meets on the second Wednesday of every month, and where the opinions are strong and the snacks are excellent. I have begun, very slowly, learning to use the wood lathe in Leonard's workshop in the garage. He always said I had the patience for it. He was probably right. Walter says I seem like myself again. I told him I was never not myself. He laughed and said that was fair. The trust documents are in the fireproof box in the hall closet, exactly where Leonard put them. Howard's number is in my phone under H, the way it always has been. I reviewed everything with Howard in March, made a few small updates, and left his office feeling the way I used to feel after a particularly thorough document review at the firm. Not invincible, just prepared. There is a distinction, and it matters. I sat in Leonard's chair last Sunday evening with a cup of tea and the birds starting up outside the window, and I thought about the kind of man he was, the kind who understood that structures matter. Legal ones, financial ones, the ones you build before you need them, quietly, without announcement. He was not a dramatic man. He was a careful one. There is more valor in careful than people give it credit for. I wrote in my journal that morning, as I do most mornings, at the kitchen table before the coffee is finished brewing. I don't always know what I'll say until I'm saying it. That morning I wrote, "The house is still in the trust. The trust is still solid. I am still standing in it." That was enough for a Sunday morning. Some weeks that's the whole of what you need. People ask me sometimes, not directly, but in the way people circle around a question they're not sure they're allowed to ask, whether I feel guilty. Whether I should have told Janelle sooner, whether keeping quiet about the trust, about Howard, about everything Leonard and I had put in place, was a kind of deception toward my own daughter. I've thought about that. Genuinely thought about it, not just dismissed it. Here's what I keep coming back to. I didn't hide the trust from Janelle to protect the money. I didn't tell her because Leonard taught me, in 38 years of watching him navigate the world, that the strongest structures are the ones you build before anyone knows they're necessary. Not as a weapon, not as a secret kept out of distrust, as preparation. There is a difference, and it matters, and I think most people understand it if they're honest with themselves. What Brent did had a logic to it too. That's the uncomfortable part of looking at this clearly. He was afraid of scarcity. He had grown up, Janelle told me later, in a house where financial security was always one bad month away from disappearing. And that kind of early fear doesn't leave a person easily. It gets built into the way they see opportunity. It gets built into the way they see a grieving widow in a paid-off house and do the math without meaning to. I'm not excusing what he did. A grown person is responsible for what they do with their fear. But I think I understand the root of it, and understanding it keeps me from carrying more bitterness than the situation actually deserves. Janelle trusted someone she loved, and that person slowly arranged what she was allowed to see. That is not stupidity. That is what happens inside a marriage when one person is more certain than the other. I did the same thing with Leonard in our early years, deferred to his certainty on things I should have engaged with directly. I grew out of it. I believe Janelle will too. I am watching her grow out of it right now, slowly and not without pain. And I am not going to make that harder by treating her like she should have known better sooner. What I want people to take from this, not as a lesson I'm teaching, because I'm 67 years old and I'm done performing wisdom, but just as something I noticed, is this. The decisions you make quietly, carefully, before anything goes wrong, are the ones that hold when everything does. Leonard didn't set up that trust because he suspected anyone. He set it up because he was the kind of person who understood that structures matter and that the time to build them is when you don't yet need them. I was a paralegal for nearly 30 years. I watched people arrive at attorneys' offices in crisis, needing in a week what they should have built over a decade. The paperwork was always harder under pressure. The outcomes were always worse. What Leonard gave me wasn't just legal protection. It was the ability to stay calm in that living room with Mr. Kavanaugh's briefcase open on the coffee table, because I already knew what was true. Calm is only possible when you're standing on something solid. You can't perform calm from nothing. I think about Winifred, about myself, the version of me from 10 months earlier, sitting in the Wells Fargo parking lot after learning about that phone call. And what I want to tell her is, you already have what you need. Leonard already built it. You just have to stay steady long enough to let it matter. That was enough. Most days, that is still enough.